I was folding towels in the guest room when my phone buzzed on the dresser. Just a tiny sound, one I'd heard 1,000 times before, but that day it cut my life cleanly in two. The name on the screen made me smile without thinking. Daniel, my boy, my reason for everything. I still called him that in my heart, even though he was 32 now, living 2 hours away in Atlanta with his wife Allison and their 2 little ones. I wiped my hands on my jeans, still smelling faintly of lemon cleaner, and opened his message. Mom, Allison and I talked. We think it's best if this cruise is just for us and the kids. Quality family time. You understand, right? At first the words blurred into nicer meanings that weren't there. Maybe he was teasing. Maybe he meant another trip. Then I read it again. Just for us and the kids. The towel slipped from my hands and landed on the carpet. The scent of detergent hung in the air as I stared at the screen, unable to blink. This wasn't a gift they were giving me. It was a door closing. And I had paid for the door myself. $19,800. My entire savings from substitute teaching and part-time shifts at the library. I'd booked the Caribbean suite, the dolphin excursion, the family dinners at sea. I'd pictured the kids' faces when they saw blue water stretching out forever, imagined messy ice cream smiles and too much sunscreen. I wanted to give them a memory they'd never forget. Apparently, I did, just not the kind I had imagined. Another message came through. We'll celebrate with you when we get back, maybe dinner or something. Dinner or something. The words tightened around my throat. I sank onto the edge of the bed, surrounded by neatly folded laundry and the quiet order I'd built after Jack passed. The cicadas outside hummed their relentless summer song, and suddenly the whole room felt off balance. Allison's voice replayed in my mind, smooth, polite, always deliberate. This house is so cozy, she had told me once, with a smile that sparkled just enough to sting. Cozy, as if it were a flaw. The word sat between us like a folded napkin, neat, intentional, dismissive. I had tried so hard to make her comfortable. I cooked the meals she liked. I watched her children on weekends. I sent care packages when she was sick. She always thanked me, but her eyes drifted past mine as if she were already somewhere more important. And Daniel, my Daniel, began to sound more like her with each passing year. Mother, he'd say now instead of mom, polite, distant, like a man addressing a stranger. The yellow walls of the guest room glowed with afternoon light, warm and soft. This was where Daniel slept when he came home from college, where his kids napped after running barefoot in the yard. I had pictured them here before the cruise, giggling while we packed sunscreen and snacks. But the room felt like a museum now, a place honoring a kind of happiness that no longer belonged to me. I told myself not to take it personally. Maybe they needed family time. Maybe I was being dramatic. But beneath every excuse, the truth pulsed steady and cruel. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I was the extra chair they moved aside to make room for someone else. The resentment didn't arrive loudly. It crept in like water through a crack, quiet, patient, inevitable. Suddenly, every small slight looked sharper. The way Allison corrected me in front of the kids. Actually, we don't give them sugar after 6, Maggie. The way Daniel laughed and said, you know how Mom is, when I offered advice. The way they let my calls go to voicemail, then texted back hours later with 2 effortless words. All good. I had mistaken their convenience for closeness. I thought being useful meant being loved. I thought paying for things meant I still had a place in their lives. But standing there with that message burning on my screen, I realized I had bought my own exclusion. The air felt heavy, dense, like the house hadn't been breathed in for years. My eyes drifted to the quilt on the bed. Jack's mother had sewn it for us when we married. Family first, he used to say after long days at the garage, his hands still smelling of oil and grit. We built our lives around that idea, but family, I was learning, can forget its own foundation once the walls look good enough. I picked up the fallen towel and folded it again, slow, deliberate, because it was something I could still control. Then I set the phone face down on the dresser. Somewhere in the house, the dryer hummed. Outside, someone started a lawnmower. Life kept going as if nothing had changed, but something had. I wanted to call Daniel. I wanted to ask, when did I stop being family? But I knew how it would go. He'd soften his tone, call me Mom, blame Allison, tell me it wasn't personal. And I would forgive him. Again. Not this time. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew something in me had shifted. The world looked different. Sharper at the edges, quieter in the places that used to echo. Every corner of this little bungalow, from the lemon-scented kitchen to the porch with its creaking swing, whispered a truth I'd ignored for too long. I had given too much of myself to people who didn't see me. I walked to the window and watched the sunlight fade across the yard, the magnolia leaves catching the last gold of the day. The phone buzzed behind me. Daniel again. Probably offering another tidy explanation to make everything seem reasonable. But it wasn't reasonable. It was the moment I finally understood the difference between being loved and being used. And though I didn't know it then, this was the moment my quiet revenge began, born not from anger, but from the steady heartbeat of a woman who finally chose herself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen and the soft drip of rain against the window. My mind kept replaying Daniel's message until the words felt like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. You understand, right? As if my pain were simply a polite agreement, as if being excluded from a trip I paid for was something reasonable, something a mother should swallow quietly. The rain grew steadier, filling the house with its steady rhythm. I used to love nights like this, warm lamplight, a blanket around my shoulders, the sound of storms outside while I felt safe inside. Tonight it felt like the world was tapping on the glass to remind me how small I truly was in my own family. I eventually got up and walked to the kitchen. The air still smelled faintly of the coffee I'd brewed that morning. I sat at the table, the one Jack and I bought secondhand when Daniel was still in high school. Its surface was worn smooth from years of family dinners, from pencil marks etched into the wood, from coffee rings I'd stopped trying to scrub away. I ran my fingers across those old scars, remembering when this room was filled with laughter instead of silence. Jack had been a mechanic his whole life. His hands were always stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd come home smelling like steel and exhaustion, but he'd smile anyway and kiss me on the cheek. "Family first, Mags," he always said. That was his entire philosophy. Everything we did, every skipped vacation, every extra shift, was for Daniel. When Jack passed, I promised myself I'd keep that promise for both of us. I thought Daniel understood that. I thought he remembered where he came from. Somewhere along the way, my boy became a man who measured people by what they could give him, not by what they meant to him. I could still hear Allison's voice the first time she visited after they got married. Light, graceful, with that polished tone that never let you forget your place. "This house is so cozy," she said, running a manicured finger along the mantel. Cozy. A word that hovered like a compliment and a cut all at once. To her, cozy meant old, small, outdated. But to me, it meant home. It meant the smell of peach cobbler Daniel used to beg for. It meant safety after long days. It meant everything she had never had to build with her own hands. Resentment roots itself in the smallest things. The way she'd correct me in front of the kids, "Actually, we don't give them sugar after 6. Maggie." Or laugh lightly when Daniel called me mother instead of mom, as if she'd coached him into sounding just a little less mine. And Daniel, he never defended me. His visits became shorter. His calls turned into quick check-ins. When he did call, he talked about business trips and stock options, things that had nothing to do with me or the life I'd lived. My stories made him check his watch. My memories made him sigh. So I kept doing what I always did. I paid the babysitter when Allison's schedule got busy. I sent groceries when Daniel mentioned rising prices. I mailed care packages during flu season. I thought if I just kept showing up, they'd remember who I was. But all I did was teach them that I'd always be there. Quiet, dependable, invisible. The resentment didn't sweep in dramatically. It crept over years, settling into the cracks of every thank you that didn't sound real, every visit cut short, every holiday where I watched them scroll their phones while I cooked. The rain softened to a drizzle. I looked at the clock. 2:30 in the morning. I should have gone back to bed, but instead I sat there in the half-dark and let myself finally feel it all. The disappointment, the quiet anger, the grief I'd swallowed for years, because mothers aren't supposed to admit when their children hurt them. It wasn't just about the cruise, it was about every moment they'd made me feel optional. Every time I'd paid for my place at a table, I helped build. I realized, sitting there with cold coffee and rain dripping off the gutters, that I had become invisible in my own family. Not Maggie, the woman who raised a son alone and built a life out of nothing. Just mother, a title used politely, the way you label the last item on a shelf. The realization didn't bring tears. It brought a stillness so deep it felt like the house itself was exhaling with me. I finished my cold coffee, rinsed the cup, and stood by the window as the rain finally stopped. The world outside was silent again, but inside me, something had shifted. Something small but powerful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be chosen. I felt awake. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that presses down on the world. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, hands wrapped around the mug just to feel something warm. The air still smelled like rain-soaked earth from the night before. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I hadn't heard from Daniel since his message, and part of me kept glancing at my phone, hoping for an apology that would never come. I opened my laptop instead, looking for distraction. My inbox was the usual mess: store coupons, newsletters, appointment reminders. Then a subject line froze me. Beach house options. The sender was Allison. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it wasn't meant for me. Then I noticed my name at the bottom of the thread. She'd copied me by accident. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I clicked it open, my stomach tightening. It was a back and forth between her and someone named Veronica. They were discussing buying a beach house, something for their future. But halfway down the thread, Allison's words jumped out at me, clean and sharp. Once the house title is in Dan's name, we can create some distance. She's sweet, but she's not our circle. Let's just get through this cruise first. I reread it, hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. She's not our circle. That one line hit harder than anything she'd ever said to my face. My hands went cold. I felt heat crawl into my cheeks, the kind that comes from humiliation mixed with heartbreak. Sweet, not our circle. So polite, so casual, like I was a piece of furniture they planned to move out once they redecorated their lives. I had paid for everything, for the cruise, the excursions, the upgrades, and all along they'd been planning how to erase me. I thought of the weekends I watched the kids so they could relax, the nights I'd lain awake worrying if Daniel was eating well during business trips, the groceries I sent, the bills I covered. I'd been their silent safety net, and they'd repaid me with distance. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world looked colder. My eyes drifted to another tab. I opened my bank account, and what I saw made my breath catch. Withdrawals, charges I didn't recognize, luxury hotels in Atlanta, spa appointments, a jewelry store charge for nearly $2,000, my emergency card, the one I'd given them when Daniel said they were in a pinch, had become their personal expense account. They'd spent nearly $40,000 in a single year. That number wasn't just a balance, it was every extra shift I'd worked, every dollar I'd saved since Jack died, every moment I'd believed that generosity meant love. The resentment inside me didn't boil, it crystallized. I thought of Jack then, I could almost see him sitting at this same table, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag after a long day at the garage. "Know your worth, Mags," he'd say. "Don't let anyone treat you like you're lucky to be needed." Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that. The truth settled heavy in my chest. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had allowed it, by staying quiet, by hoping kindness could change people who didn't want to be changed. The emotional weight hit all at once. I could have cried, could have called Daniel and demanded answers, could have unleashed everything I felt. But anger is loud, and they didn't deserve to hear even the sound of it. Silence, I realized, was stronger. I opened a new browser window and typed in the number for the cruise company. My hands trembled only once before I steadied myself and dialed. "Good morning," a cheerful voice said. "This is Ocean Star Cruises. How can I help you today?" "Hello," I said, keeping my tone calm. "My name is Margaret Hayes. I need to cancel a reservation for 3 passengers departing next month." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes," she said. "Is everything all right? Any emergency?" "No emergency," I replied softly. "Just a change of plans." There was a cancellation fee, $5,900. A month ago, that number would have made me hesitate, but now it felt like the cost of peace. "Yes," I said. "Cancel all 3. When the call ended, I opened my banking app. I froze the cards, locked the accounts, changed every password. One click at a time, I unhooked myself from their expectations, their entitlement, their quiet contempt. When it was finally done, I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. The clouds were breaking, sunlight catching the wet pavement and making it shine. I took a slow breath. For the first time in years, the air felt light, like it finally belonged to me again. I whispered one word into the quiet kitchen. "Enough." It didn't sound bitter. It sounded like a beginning. I poured myself another cup of coffee. It was strong, a little bitter, just the way I liked it. And for the first time, the taste made me smile. A week later, the sun burned bright over Savannah again, but the air carried that heavy, wet heat that clings to your skin and makes every movement feel slow. I was out in the garden pulling weeds when my phone buzzed in my pocket for the 20th time that day. It hadn't stopped since last night. Call after call, voicemail after voicemail, texts piling up like rain clouds. I didn't have to check the screen to know who it was. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand and kept working. The soil was warm and honest beneath my fingers. The earth didn't lie. It didn't flatter. It didn't take. It gave back exactly what you put in. I couldn't say the same about my own family. By late afternoon, I finally went inside. My hands were still stained with dirt, but I didn't bother washing them. The phone buzzed again on the counter. This time, I picked it up. 17 missed calls from Daniel, 14 from Allison, 2 new voicemails. The latest text from Daniel read, "Mom, call me right now. This is serious." I poured a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. A small, almost guilty part of me felt sorry for them. Almost. But then that email flashed through my mind. She's not our circle. I'd been the one who paid for that circle to spin. And now that it had stopped, they were finally feeling the weight of what they'd built. I pressed play on the first voicemail. Daniel's voice rushed out, tight with panic. "Mom, what did you do? The cruise line says everything's canceled. We're at the airport. None of the cards are working. This is embarrassing. Call me." Embarrassing. That was his word of choice. Not hurtful. Not confusing. Not "we're worried about you." Embarrassing. Because his image had taken a hit. Not his conscience. I played the second voicemail. This time it was Allison. Her voice thin and strained, wrapped in that forced calm she used when she wanted to sound composed. "Maggie, I don't know what misunderstanding happened, but this isn't right. The kids are crying. People are staring. Can you please just fix this?" Fix this. The same words I'd heard all my life. Fix the bills. Fix the childcare. Fix the emergencies. Fix the messes they didn't want to deal with. I had always fixed it. I set the phone face down and let the quiet settle over the room. It didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. A breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and the hum of cicadas. I could almost hear Jack's voice in it, steady, patient, proud. Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I heard a car pull into the driveway, tires on gravel, doors slamming. I didn't rush to the door. I knew it was Daniel. The doorbell rang, then knocking, hard, impatient knocking. I took my time walking over and finally opened the door. Daniel stood there, flushed and disheveled, wearing a polo shirt and a look somewhere between anger and disbelief. "Mom, what is going on?" he snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? We were standing there at the airport like fools. Everyone was staring." I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, the boy who used to run into my arms at the county fair. The man who once left me a note in his lunchbox saying, "Love you, Mom." Now he stood in front of me like a stranger inconvenienced by the consequences of his own choices. "All I did," I said calmly, "was stop paying for people who don't see me." He blinked, thrown off by how steady my voice was. "That's not fair, Mom." "No," I answered softly. "What's not fair is giving your whole life to someone who treats you like an obligation." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. Every truth between us already hung in the thick summer air. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, deflated. "Allison's upset," he said quietly. "The kids are confused. We didn't mean to hurt you." Maybe that was true. But unintentional wounds still bleed. "Go home, Daniel," I said. "You'll figure things out." He stared at me, searching for the mother who always fixed everything, who always forgave, always folded, always made it easier for him to be careless. I didn't offer her. Eventually, he turned and walked back to the car. I watched the taillights disappear down the street until the darkness swallowed them. When I closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, I felt something inside me settle. The resentment I had carried for so long loosened its grip. In its place was something steadier, something quiet, something like peace. Outside, the cicadas sang louder as the night rolled in. Inside, I smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. For the first time, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom, like a woman finally choosing herself. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. The phone still buzzed every now and then, mostly messages from Daniel that I didn't open, but I learned something new. Sometimes silence is an answer, all by itself. I woke up early each morning, made my tea, and sat on the porch while the sun inched its way over the marsh. The air smelled like salt and magnolia, the kind of scent that reminds you life keeps moving, even when you feel stuck. I watched the light spread across the yard and realized how different peace feels when you stop asking permission to have it. A few days into this new quiet, an email appeared in my inbox. "Refund confirmation," the subject read. I opened it and saw the full amount, $19,800, returned to my account. I let out a small laugh. Not because of the money, but because it felt like the universe reached down and handed me back a piece of myself I'd misplaced years ago. Below the receipt was a brief message from the travel agent I'd spoken to on the phone. "I hope you rebook something for yourself, Mrs. Hayes. You deserve a vacation, too." That one simple sentence made my throat tighten. Deserve. It was a word I'd never applied to myself. I had spent decades earning love, giving more, forgiving more, sacrificing more, hoping someone would see me the way I saw them. But sitting on that porch, sunlight warming my shoulders, I realized I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I didn't owe my peace to anyone. That afternoon, I walked down to the cafe near the pier, a place Jack and I used to go on slow weekends. I hadn't stepped inside in years. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon. The same waitress was behind the counter, her hair a little grayer, her smile still familiar. "Haven't seen you in a while, Maggie," she said. I told her I'd been busy, but the truth was much simpler. I'd forgotten what it felt like to do something purely for myself. I ordered a sweet tea and sat by the window. Boats rocked gently in the water outside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to rush home, to check my phone, to brace myself for someone else's needs. When I got back that evening, the phone was waiting for me again. 3 missed calls from Daniel. Texts piling up. "Mom, please answer. Allison wants to apologize. We need to talk." I stood there for a long moment, letting the screen glow in the dim kitchen. The ache in my chest rose like an old ghost. It would have been easy to give in, to fall back into the role they expected, the forgiving mother, the quiet fixer. But I knew how that conversation would go. Guilt disguised as concern, excuses wrapped in soft words. I set the phone down, face down, and walked outside. The porch boards were still warm from the sun. A neighbor's wind chime tinkled gently in the breeze. I sat on the wooden swing and watched the sky melt into gold, then rose, then soft lavender. I thought of Daniel as a little boy, running through sprinklers, laughing so hard he doubled over. I thought of Jack, the way he used to look at our son like he hung the moon. Somewhere along the road, we'd all changed, and I had held on so tightly to who we used to be that I'd forgotten who I was. The resentment didn't sting anymore. It just existed, like an old scar that didn't need retelling. I didn't hate Daniel or Allison. I just didn't need their approval to feel whole. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail from the local library where I used to volunteer. Inside was a handwritten note from the new librarian thanking me for donating books the previous year. At the bottom, she'd added, "Your kindness still makes a difference here." I read that line twice. Someone noticed. Someone cared. And somehow, that meant more than years of empty thank yous from people who only saw me when they needed something. That night, I brewed chamomile tea and sat on the porch again. The moon hung low and bright above the marsh, silvering the water as it rippled with the tide. My phone buzzed one more time. Daniel again. "We're sorry, Mom. Can we visit this weekend? The kids miss you." I looked at the message, then quietly locked the screen. Not out of spite, out of peace. I wasn't ready. Maybe I would be someday, but not yet. I needed to live a little first, on my own terms. I sipped my tea and listened to the frogs calling near the water, their voices low and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt grounded, alive, free. I used to think love had to be earned, that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, someone would notice my worth. But now I know the truth. Love doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being honest with yourself, even if that honesty leaves you standing alone. And if you've ever given too much, if you've ever felt unseen in the life you built for others, don't wait for someone to hand you peace. Take it back. It's yours.